So this is the iPhone 8, Apple's 2017 release that honestly at the time kind of got overshadowed by the brand new ultra flashy iPhone 10. However, that did not stop the iPhone 8 picking up a lot of steam and becoming extremely popular. It had a lot of good features at the time and was significantly cheaper than the iPhone 10, so people bought it. However, as it is getting on a little bit now, I wanted to go back to it, take another look at it, and find out once and for all whether or not the iPhone 8 can be used as your only phone in 2022. Okay, so firstly, quickly covering the specs, this thing really is nothing special for 2022. It features an Apple A11 Bionic processor, 2GB of RAM, storage options of either 64, 128, or 256GB. As usual, I of course have the 64GB variant. However, a lot of people do want more storage nowadays, so it is nice that you do have these options if you want more. It weighs in at 148 grams and it comes in either silver, space gray, product red, or the one I have, along with my personal favorite, gold. It's no secret by now that I love the gold color of the iPhone 8. It's a nice blend between the previous rose gold and gold that were available on the iPhone 7. Trust me, especially on glass phones, this thing looks incredible. And as for key specs, that's pretty much it. As I said, this is going to be a quick section. Obviously, there are going to be things like battery life and screen resolution later, but in terms of more general specs, that's it for now. After this, we have the design, build quality, and button layout. How do these hold up in 2022? Well, to be totally honest, the design is a little bit dated. It features a home button opposed to the newer iPhones, which of course don't have any buttons on the front. However, do not let this fool you. I personally believe that still, in 2022, this is one of the best button layouts on any phone, period. Everything just absolutely makes sense in terms of placement. All the buttons still feel nice and clicky. There aren't any confusing shortcuts that you need to get used to. And of course, there's a mute switch, so you can mute this thing from your pocket when this thing inevitably goes off at a really awkward time. In terms of the build quality, again, this thing is no slouch. It's a glass-backed aluminium bezel iPhone, glass being Gorilla Glass, and the aluminium being 7000 series aluminium. While of course I would recommend a case for this thing due to the nature of glass being glass, seriously, unless you're really good at not dropping your phone, just put a case on it. But all in all, build quality is actually pretty good. It also features an IP67 water resistance rating, which again, is a nice to have. This means it'll protect your phone in up to a meter of water for half an hour, and in my day-to-day life, this is actually pretty handy. I will often use my phone while I'm showering in order to play some music, so the fact that I don't have to thoroughly dry my hands every time I want to change the song is certainly a nice to have. And while I certainly wouldn't recommend going swimming with this thing, it is a genuinely useful failsafe for everyday life. So overall, while of course the design does look a little bit dated now, in terms of actual user experience with this phone, there's no denying. In these two sections, it's still really nice to live with. After this, we have the screen, which is, to be honest, pretty far from cutting edge technology. The iPhone 8 features a Retina IPS display with a resolution of 750 by 1334, and this is of course in the more traditional 16:9 aspect ratio in a size of 4.7 inches. Now, while this is a bit small in 2022, even compared to my main phone, the 13 mini, the iPhone 8 actually benefits from a slightly smaller screen. Because it's small, it features a PPI of 326, and from the distance you would usually use your phone, the lower resolution really isn't that much of an issue. So while it certainly would be nice to have something better in 2022, throughout my day-to-day life using this phone, I haven't really had any issues. Of course, things like typing, as someone who is used to larger screens, do take some adjusting, but I've never found myself actively bothered by the lower quality screen. It does feature True Tone. In fact, this was the first ever iPhone to feature it, which is a very nice little quality of life improvement. If you don't know what it does, it essentially analyzes the ambient light around you and essentially adjusts the white balance on your screen so that your colors always look natural. It's a feature that was brought over from the iPad line and one that I am still very glad is on the iPhone. Finally, of course, for the screen, it does have a secondary interaction method, and seeing as it's an iPhone, this features the old faithful 3D touch. While this pressure-based system has been replaced by the time-based haptic touch, this technology will forever forever hold a place in my heart. Okay, so wrapping up the screen, overall, while it does lack many modern features, especially on paper, as long as you are okay using a smaller screen, along with things like an OLED panel or higher resolutions, the iPhone 8 is still certainly usable in 2022. But of course, this will very much depend on your wants and needs. Next up, we have the main login method for this phone. And of course, seeing as the iPhone 10, which was released after the iPhone 8, was the first iPhone with Face ID, yeah, you guessed it, the iPhone 8 has Touch ID. Now, this may not be as flashy or futuristic as Face ID, but I have found that Touch ID actually works really well on this phone. On this particular iPhone, the button isn't actually a physical button, so you can configure it however you want. I personally like setting mine to number 3, as this does feel like the most natural click, and this leads to the overall premium feel of this phone, despite it being released back in 2017. Overall, as I said, this is dated, especially for 2022, but I actually think it still performs really well as long as you are focused on the quality of life. Following on, we have the camera system. Now, typically, this is pretty important to me. However, on the iPhone 8, it's a single 12 megapixel f1.8 camera. It does also have a 7 megapixel f2.2 selfie camera, and to be completely and totally honest, it does sound pretty dated, but let's take a look at the photos and see why this isn't actually that big of a deal. The experience of actually taking photos on the iPhone 8 is actually pretty pleasant. Overall, it doesn't have the sharpness and dynamic range that you would associate with modern photography, but it does still feature pretty great HDR technology, along with a good level of sharpness and some nice color science. Again, while things like night mode or even portrait mode are reserved for newer or higher end iPhone models of this era, such as the 8 Plus or the aforementioned iPhone 10. Again, I really don't think this is the biggest deal, and I will be explaining why. In terms of video, this thing does shoot in 4K at up to 60 FPS, which was a nice upgrade from the previous iPhone 7, and it does slow motion in 1080p at up to 240 FPS. In terms of the selfie camera, it's more of the same really, so no flashy new technology or even some nice to haves, but it certainly does get the job done in terms of photos. In terms of videos on the selfie camera, this thing does film in 1080p at 30 FPS, and while this is fine for some social media posts, this thing isn't going to be winning any BAFTAs anytime soon, let's put it like that. Now, let's talk about the fact that this thing not having cutting edge, or let's be honest, butter knife edge specs really matters all that much. For what most people want to do with the iPhone 8 in 2022, this thing absolutely gets the job done. If you want to take pictures of your friends or takeaway to post on social media, this thing definitely gets the job done. Alright, so next up we have probably the most important part, OS and app performance. Now, due to the fact that the iPhone 8 was released back in 2017, it's not going to have the same lifespan as a phone released today. That said, the iPhone 6S is still alive and kicking, so who knows how long Apple are going to support this thing for. Realistically though, in terms of OS performance, I genuinely think this thing has a few years left in it. Scrolling through the OS, opening up stock apps, and performing functions like 3D touch are all pretty flawless on iOS 15. And while of course it's not the experience of a brand new iPhone, in day-to-day life in 2022, it does get the job done. In terms of more intensive performance, watching videos on this thing is absolutely fine, again, so long as you are okay with the lower screen resolution, but casually watching YouTube or TikTok is absolutely no problem for the iPhone 8. And while gaming on this phone certainly isn't the most cutting-edge experience, you can still certainly play some casual games on this thing. So yeah, overall performance on the iPhone 8 in 2022 was certainly not as cutting-edge as the newer offerings. OS performance on the iPhone 8 is surprisingly good. And while you won't be winning any gaming competitions with the iPhone 8, for most people who use this phone, it will get the job done. And overall, a pretty good experience in 2022. After this, quickly, we have the speakers. Now, obviously, the iPhone 8 does not feature a headphone jack, which honestly, in 2022 is to be expected. And for some casual listening, the speakers are fine. Well, they're certainly not as loud or clear as modern offerings. When just sat at home watching videos or scrolling through social media, the speakers on this phone will absolutely get the job done. It does feature a stereo speaker configuration, which essentially means both speakers on this phone actually work in conjunction to create a louder, wider sound that does actually improve the experience. So yeah, while it's nothing special, gets the job done. Finally, we have the battery life. Now, this thing has a battery size of 1,821 milliamp hours, which to be honest, is not a lot special in 2022. It does feature fast charging, which is nice, so when it does run down, you can charge it up much faster, but seeing as you can only buy this phone used, it is very important to make sure that you buy one with good battery health. In terms of my actual usage, I did find that I had to plug it in during the afternoon occasionally, but to be honest, this is kind of to be expected. Don't get me wrong, it's not terrible. In fact, my mum, who also to this day uses an iPhone 8, still gets through the day totally fine with the iPhone 8, but for the average user, when you're leaving the house for more than 5 hours at a time, it is certainly a good idea to get into the habit of bringing a charger. Overall though, in terms of the battery life, I can't complain too much though. I kind of knew what I was getting into. The battery life is not going to be like a brand new phone. Alright, so overall, how was this phone to use in 2022? Honestly, alright. Well, it's certainly nothing mind-blowing. I found that for average day-to-day use, the iPhone 8 kept up in 2022 just fine. And if you are looking for either an introduction to the iPhone line, a first phone for someone, or just a budget iPhone, then the iPhone 8 is certainly a good option. And as long as you understand and work around this thing's limitations, I've actually had a pretty good time with this phone. Alright guys, so that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know, by the way, what do you think of the iPhone 8? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Are you planning to buy one? Feel free to let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading those. As for now though, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.